We have an update in the saga of seat-snatching Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas. Earlier this week, United Airlines passenger Jean Marie Simon was exiled to an economy seat, despite buying a first-class ticket. Then she saw her seat handed over to Sheila Jackson Lee. That was bad enough, but after Miss Simon complained, Jackson Lee issued a statement suggesting Simon was racist, even to object. Needless to say, that's not true at all. It turns out Miss Simon is a human rights activist who spent much of her life campaigning on behalf of poor Guatemalans. Sheila Jackson Lee, meanwhile, has spent her life campaigning for re-election, playing the race card, and becoming a notoriously unpleasant airline passenger in the process. Who would you side with? The 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea are just about a month away, and if any transgender athletes seek to compete, they'll be welcomed with open arms. IOC rules allow for transgender athletes to compete as their preferred gender. A biological male winning a gold medal in a women's event now seems a matter of when, not if. Joanna Harper is transgendered and an athlete, and argues that transgender competitors don't enjoy any advantage. Joanna, there are a lot of people who in this age of gender fluidity take a relaxed view of it and accept that you can choose which bathroom to use and all that, but that when it comes to sport, when it comes to who's the fastest, who's the strongest, when you're running around a 400-meter track, that basically, from gender fluidity, we're back to two biological sexes in which those who are born male have a distinct advantage. Where are they going wrong on that?
Well, first of all, biology is actually quite complex. And so to suggest that that biology is dimorphic is incorrect. But it is certainly true that people who have gone through male puberty especially do have substantial advantages. And to be clear, the IOC rules say that transgender women can only compete in women's sports after they have gone through a year of low testosterone due to hormone therapy. And that actually changes many biological characteristics, and especially those characteristics that are important for sport.
But
and the second thing I'd like to say is that I've always admitted that transgender women have advantages over cisgender or typical women, but also disadvantages too. And the important question is, can the two groups compete against one another equitably and meaningfully?
Well, let's look at the tests and the testing that you mentioned, where they say you have to, and maybe you can actually explain this in layman's terms. You're a scientist, you understand a lot of this, but lowering testosterone, and I think the thing is you have to have your testosterone levels below 10 nanomoles per liter. And if I think about it carefully enough, I can remember what a nanomole was from my school days, if one drops from the ceiling on my head. But 10 nanomoles per liter, as I understand it, something like 90% of female athletes, their testosterone levels are around 3 nanomoles per liter. So in other words, this upper limit is 3 times what would be typical in a female athlete. So it seems like a kind of arbitrary setting unrelated to the realities of the situation.
Well, I actually agree with you there. And in fact, I am part of a committee that has recently recommended that we lower that limit from 10 to 5. And it's important to understand that that's a limit. The vast majority of transgender women will keep their testosterone below 3 and in fact below 2 and usually below 1 nanomole.
Right.
So this is an upper limit, but I absolutely agree. 10 is too high, and our committee has recommended bringing it down to 5.
You mentioned that it's not like a binary boy-girl thing. There was I think she was a South African athlete who competed in the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games a couple of years back, and her fellow female competitors were convinced that at a certain level she was transgendered, and in fact I think the authorities ended up actually testing her to find out whether she was transgendered, because her levels were believed to be extraordinarily high. I wonder if we're in danger in the end of just killing women's sport by this kind of micro-regulation of essentially the individual DNA of each participant.
Well, first of all, the athlete in question, Caster Semenya, was almost undoubtedly intersex, which some people may not be familiar with that term, but hermaphrodite is a term that more people might be familiar with. But intersex people have a mix of male and female characteristics, right. And Semenya is almost undoubtedly intersex. So there are different issues than with transgender athletes, and it's important to separate the two. But again, it is important to have fair play. It is important to that introducing intersex and/or transgender athletes does not overly affect the playing field that exists. And transgender athletes in particular are hugely underrepresented in women's sports.
Well, we'll see.
In other words, if you were to look at the population of transgender athletes, you would expect that there would be a lot more athletes than there actually are.
Well, we'll see where that ends up, Joanna. It may well be that men and women just end up running around the track altogether, and there aren't these separate events anymore. First, the left agitated over racist trees, as we reported yesterday. Now, another tree controversy, this one involving the first family. That's next.